All right, we still got some people logging in at this time. We got about a minute before we start. If you can just follow the on-screen directions, make sure that you're muted and your video is turned off. That way we can kind of save some bandwidth and so our presenter doesn't get interrupted by bad internet signals. If you don't mind, if you have questions, there's a little chat box and you can see right there where that blue arrow is, where you can type your questions in there. We have several of the horticulture agents from across the region on the program today that will be answering questions. And Stephen also will probably be answering questions along the way through the program. So he's going to be talking to us today about seasonal pruning. And Stephen, take it away, sir.
All right, Michael, thank you so much. I'm your horticulturist from Brazoria County. We're a team of horticulturists up and down the coast that are providing quality programs to you. We thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder that the program is being recorded, but we will provide a link to the program survey because we need to know how we're doing, how we're performing. And we'll also have a link to the video recording, which will follow within the next day. I'll be delivering a program to you called Seasonal Landscape Pruning. We'll mostly be focusing on pruning woody trees and shrubs. I know there may be some questions regarding pruning palm trees. Unfortunately, I don't have that expertise, but we do have colleagues that are online that may be able to assist with questions regarding that. So I'm just going to focus on ornamental woody trees and shrubs. A little bit about future programs. We're bringing these programs to you every other week, starting in 2021. We're really happy to have the time to be able to build quality programs for you. On February the 17th, Gardening the Gulf Coast will bring you citrus care. We hope you'll join a horticulture agent from Jefferson County, David Oates, where you'll learn how to properly care for your citrus tree. Of course, we have to talk about programs that are meaningful to AgriLife Extension. Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service of Brazoria County, as well as all of our joining counties, our family, offers practical how-to education programs based on university research to help your quality of life. And we do that through larger initiatives like the Earth Kind program. The information that I'll be bringing to you today is part of that Earth Kind landscaping program. There is a section of the Earth Kind program online that addresses best practices in pruning. What we'll be doing today, of course, you got to know why you're pruning, why are you pruning, when to prune. That's part of the title of this program, Seasonal Pruning. We'll go over briefly pruning tools appropriate for the job. If you don't have the right tool for the right job, you really you may struggle a little bit. So I would suggest that you pay attention to the quality of tools that you do implement for these kind of pruning activities. A little bit on how to prune. We'll also talk throughout this program about form and function. And then we'll have a bibliography at the end of this program, resources for you. So when we think of landscaping with ornamental plants, woody species, you may have it in your mind that this is what we're striving for. I think that a formal design is, I love a formal design. This is a picture of the walkway, or it's the grand view at the Dallas Arboretum and Botanical Garden up in Dallas proper. They have areas that have more natural pruning that they've applied to some of their collections, and they do have a very formal presence. I like to call this the wedding cake, right? This is it's outstanding when you can be in the presence of this kind of quality work. So when you can travel, I do ask that you go visit some of these botanical gardens that present these kind of features. So this kind of formal pruning has a kind of elegance to it. I think it's part of our culture. As we're growing up gardening and we're landscaping in our front yard, oftentimes we might think this is the way that we need to make everything look. But I'm here to tell you folks that this is just one type of pruning. Now I want to show you another formal type of pruning. This is formal with sharp designs, with linear features in the garden. Pruning in a way that draws your eye to the landscape. Now, this is a picture that I took on my visit up to Nacogdoches, to the Ruby M. Mize Azalea Garden and the collections up at Stephen F. Austin University in Nacogdoches. This is a formal garden as well. This is a manipulated environment. When we're pruning our plants, or when we're putting plants into our landscape, we're replicating nature. We're bringing in a quality that's familiar to our eye, that we can, submit an application to be Garden of the Month, Garden of the Year, right? For our homeowners association, something we can be proud of. And you can go either way with pruning methods and maintaining the woody species that you have as part of your ornamental palette at your house. You can go formal. Nothing wrong with that. I love a formal garden. I love that wedding cake. But there's also these wonderful naturalistic settings or natural pruning that we can apply with the methods that we use. So again, I ask that you think about that. You're not relegated just to formal shapes or linear shapes. You can go with more natural shapes, and some of the plants that I'll be talking about today require that. They work best when they're pruned more to their shape, not to our shape, right? So, a little bit about why we prune. We perform pruning for training. We want these plants to grow in a way that, to meet our expectations. If there's a vining plant, you're going to prune that plant, or roses are a really good example of that, right? So vining roses, we do prune them to train them in a fashion that, where we can manipulate that plant itself. Of course, pruning is an activity that I do encourage to help maintain plant health and plant vigor. Pruning on trees and shrubs is part of that cleanup, if you will. We're encouraging new growth when we do commit to a pruning activity. Pruning also helps to improve the quality of flowers, fruit, foliage, and stems. And also pruning, the act of pruning, can also restrict growth. Let's say you have a very successful shrub or a very successful tree that is growing a multi-trunk specimen, like mountain laurel. Let's say mountain laurel you've got a Texas mountain laurel in your front yard in good drainage, and those plants can be monster plants if you let them go. So it's best to keep those kind of plants that have very vigorous growth in line or in bounds by restricting the growth through pruning methods. So when do we prune? I know that's the magic question that I get. Right now, I'm involved with our demonstration garden in an orchard that we have here in Angleton. And I won't be talking about pruning of fruit trees or citrus trees. David Oates, the next session on the 17th, will be talking about best practices for pruning citrus trees. But again, I'm focusing all on ornamental horticulture. That's what we're talking about today. So when do you prune? Late winter is the best time to be pruning these plants. Now, there are exceptions to that. We need to pay attention to those plants that are spring flowering plants, like azaleas or red bud. How many of you know what a red bud is? So I'll let you know. Red bud is a Texas native plant. There are three native species that occur and are distributed throughout Texas. The one you'll most commonly see has the taxonomic name Cercis canadensis, variety canadensis. That's a variety that you'll see distributed in natural areas in this part of Texas, all the way to our east coast of the United States. There are two other species one is more of a southern species, another one is more of a central Texas to the west species. But red bud, that's a native tree, a small stature native tree that really starts showing off in early spring. And if you start pruning that plant prior to its flowering, you may not see any flowering on that. So a little note and a little bit of warning as well. We want to, I guess, I wouldn't say modify per se, but we need to keep an eye on ourselves when we're pruning as well. This has to do with seasonality. If you're pruning a plant at the right time in late winter, what you're doing is you're encouraging growth that we anticipate in spring. Then if you come back in and you start pruning that canopy on a tree or a woody species, you start pruning that canopy, you are, in essence, you're depleting that plant of the resources that it has gathered through its natural process, through its biology. So again, you're promoting new growth, and if you start pruning that canopy right after it's promoting new growth, you're depriving it of an opportunity for it to continue to be vigorous and grow. So continual pruning can result in damaged or weakened plants. It doesn't mean you're going to kill your tree the first year, but you're just going to weaken that plant, which will make it more susceptible to diseases, fungal pathogens. I wouldn't say susceptible to insect damage, but that kind of goes with that as well. So you understand what I'm saying when I say, we need to keep a check on ourselves. This is a list that I took and adapted from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension's Earthkind Landscaping. This is a short list of some trees and shrubs that we may put into our yard. These are fairly common. They're appropriate native trees, like different species of elm tree, Ulmus elata, winged elm, Ulmus crassifolia, which is cedar elm. So there are different elm species that are native to our area. And certainly you should take that into consideration. Prune them when they're dormant, right? Ash trees. There are several ash trees that are newer divisions or newer developments, community developments have a list of plants that they put out into their yards. I lived in a house where ash trees, a specific species of ash tree, I think it was Fraxinus pennsylvanica, was planted up and down the neighborhood. And you would prune those when they're dormant. Different species of oak trees. Now, a little word of caution for oak. In central Texas, there is a disease called oak wilt, and it's a very serious disease. So there's not a really effective cure for that once a tree is infected with that disease. So the general rule of thumb for all oak species is not to prune it from early February to June to around midsummer. There are some exceptions to that. It depends on the state of your tree. If the tree has limbs that are already dead or dropping, or are a hazard, certainly you want to take care of that as soon as possible. But as a general rule of thumb for maintaining oak trees, late winter, but kind of caution, kind of slack off of pruning if you're going to do that for any oak species in areas that are highly susceptible to oak wilt. Pecans. Pecans are our state tree. If you didn't know that, you know it now. I love pecan trees. As a matter of fact, I brought back a pecan show this last year for our county. We'll be expanding that this year. Really proud of that. I encourage you to celebrate pecans. If you have the room in your yard, put out that giant tree, that massive tree. Plant it appropriately away from your house as well as, in the right spot. And you can prune pecan trees around this time of year as well. Different species of pistachio, sycamore, summer flowering trees, crepe myrtle. I know we've all heard that sing-song crepe myrtle, right? The malpruning, that is a term, malpruning. You've heard it here first if you didn't hear it before, of crepe myrtle. I would suggest to you, while crepe myrtle will respond and can handle the kind of pollarding, right, a certain kind of shaping of trees, where you cut them off the head, and they look like these naked hands that are standing up in the landscape, they will respond and they will bloom off of that new growth. But you can, I think that crepe myrtles are so much more elegant in their natural shape. So I suggest that you start to back off of that if you're committed to doing that currently. I know my father is. He thinks that's the way you're supposed to trim a crepe myrtle. But I'm here to tell you folks, it's better practice to let those trees grow to their natural form. Other summer flowering shrubs that you would prune in their dormant state right now. Glossolabilia, different species of hibiscus, ones that we commonly call Althea, butterfly bush, hydrangeas, mock orange, possum holly. Possum holly is a native shrub to our area. It's a deciduous shrub. It will, like its species name indicates, it does drop its leaves in the wintertime. But that is a tree, that is a shrub, a shrubby, gosh, I consider possum holly to be more of a large shrub, but I have talked to colleagues that will call it a tree. It's a multi-stem specimen, and you can tree form that plant, right? In other words, you can trim it up to a single leader and then have an umbrella-shaped canopy on a plant like possum holly. You can train that plant through pruning methods. But keep in mind that around this time of year is a good time to be pruning that plant. And there's a caveat to that, and I'll address that in just a moment. And this is for all members of that plant family, all of the hollies. Roses, repeat bloomers, Texas sage. Y'all know that plant. Some people call it barometer bush. I see it mostly planted in central Texas because it's a very drought tolerant plant. It needs well-draining soil, but it can handle a very formal pruning shape, those kind of rounded mounds that we saw from the Dallas Arboretum of Botanical Garden, or you can let them grow to their natural shape. They get kind of spindly if you let them grow to their natural shape. So you do have to do some maintenance pruning to Texas sage. But we call them barometer bush because, after a good rain event, they'll start producing these wonderful bell-shaped flowers, purple flowers. They're just gorgeous. Contrast that against their silver foliage. Others you want to hang away from, maybe stay away from just until about April, May, or June, after their spring flowering, like the orchid tree, like dogwoods, fringe tree, deciduous magnolias, redbud. Remember I talked about redbud, or even Texas mountain laurel. Texas mountain laurel is a member of the pea family, believe it or not, like table peas. It's a member of that plant family. It does produce fruits that have toxic beans inside of it, so don't go eating those beans, folks. It's not good. But they are a member of the pea family. They're a very robust, large tree, needs full sun, glossy foliage. We consider it an evergreen because it holds on to its leaves. It just drops them very, very slowly throughout the year. But that is one of the first flowering native trees that we have that we can put in our yard with good drainage. And they smell just like lilac. Some folks say they smell like grape Kool-Aid. So if you haven't had a chance to smell the flowers on a Texas mountain laurel, I recommend you do that. Other winter, spring flowering shrubs like azaleas. We've got some azaleas that are popping up right now. They're flowering right now. Camellias, flowering quince, forsythia, viburnum, wisteria, and of course, once bloomer roses. Now, here's the exception to what I was just talking about. Broadleaf and needle leaf evergreens. You can shear or trim those anytime just to maintain the former size of the arborvitaes. The boxwoods, up at Stephen F. Austin University and the gardens they have up there, they have a large collection of different boxwoods. So that's why I put the taxonomic name as Buxus species, because there are many different species that were part of a research program at Stephen F. Austin University. And they have a wonderful collection of different types of boxwoods. Cherry laurel, another native tree to our area. Evergreen sumac, I don't see that so much in our area, but it's one you could consider if you have good drainage in your yard up and down the coast. It's an evergreen sumac. It does produce berries that are great for wildlife, high in vitamin C. But again, it's also a member of the same plant family that poison ivy is in. So if you have a very a high allergic reaction to poison ivy, just be careful around evergreen sumac. I'm not saying that you will have a reaction to that. I don't, right? But just be aware of where some of these plants come from and how they're associated in their plant families. Junipers, red tip photinia, pittosporums, wax myrtle, and Japanese yew. The ones that I've isolated are those that are known to produce berries on previous year's growth. So you can trim those lightly, at an appropriate time of year. All members of the holly family, Ilex species, of course, are part of that. There is a native plant called yopon. Here in our county, in Brazoria County, it's looked at as a weedy native shrub. It's a very dominant shrub or tree in our area. And so, there are naturalists, there are folks like you and me that drive down the highway, and you'll see just a heavy, dense forest of these particular plants. They're appropriate for our area, but they're fairly common. And so people don't. I don't see any of my neighbors planting the Ilex vomitoria or yopon in our area. But keep in mind that they do produce berries. The females produce berries. Gosh, I'm starting to get off I'll get off on a little side topic. All members of the holly family will produce one plant that'll either have all of the flowers on the one plant will all either be male flowers, and on a separate plant, you'll have all the flowers that are going to be female. What does that mean? When you go to a nursery, get to know your nursery people or the resource that you go to, and check in with them. If you're buying a holly because you want to see berries on it, make sure you're getting one that has been known to be a female, right? That in essence that has female flowers on it or female reproductive organs on that shrub. Yopon, when you go through a natural area, you will see some individuals that will have berries and some that won't, and that's just why. It's just part of their biology. Pyracantha, keep an eye on, again, old wood, etc. So let's move on. Now, when we're pruning, I ask you to consider this. When I'm in my front yard, and I've fallen under the same fever, I call it pruning fever, where you go out and you're ready to prune. It's the right time of year. You've identified what the shrub or the tree is you have, and you're thinking, I've just sharpened up my hand pruners, I've got my sharp saw, and I'm going to go to town on this tree. And I ask you to pause and plan how you're going to proceed with pruning. You can over prune your tree or your shrub. Remember, folks, the biology of these plants is they get their energy from a photosynthetic process. If you reduce that canopy too much, that reduces the ability of that plant to gather that energy, if you will, to store that energy in its roots, to funnel that energy right to the right parts of its own self so that it can be a healthy plant. So I ask you to always go into this and look at the tree itself or the shrub and see what needs to be taken care of. Identify the overall structure, remove dead or broken or diseased limbs, and prune them back to a strong lateral branch. And I'll show you what that is in a moment. When you're making training cuts, I ask that you think about the natural growth of that plant, how it normally would grow without, a formal pruning, so that you get to know those plants, so that you'll feel more confident as you proceed forward in pruning them. Always make corrective pruning, eliminate any weak and narrow crotches, and remove water sprouts. So this is a picture that I took at a client's house of an oak tree that its canopy was reducing, right? And the client said, "What is wrong with my oak tree? It looks like it's dying." And I'm looking at other oak trees around the neighborhood, and some have a very full canopy and others are a little bit sparse, like the one that we're looking at. And I think that this is my my consultation with the client, I thought, I think it's more than just malpruning on this tree. I think that they thought they were doing the right thing, hiring a company to come in and trim the upper canopy and pruning so much out of it that the tree itself starts to respond over time and diminishes that canopy, diminishes that growth that it's putting out. And this is a good example of that. There are other environmental stressors that go into why this tree is not filling out, its canopy is not filling out as well as it should. One is probably malpruning on a continual basis. Another is water. Maybe they were not focusing on getting water at a time of drought to this tree to keep it healthy and growing. My client said, "Can I put fertilizer on this?" And I said, "No, you cannot fertilize your way out of this. You can maintain your tree, add organic matter back to the lawn environment." And I told the client, you see that ring of landscaping you have right up against the bark, right? So you'll see neighbors possibly. I'm not saying that you do this, folks, dear viewer, but I'm just saying, if you do have a landscape feature as a volcano up around that tree, remove it. You're not doing that tree any favors, right? Pull it back away from that trunk. So I told the client, I said, you might consider not putting your landscaping right up against that trunk. Those geraniums are going to pass on, but this tree is going to live on forever. So take care of that tree like you're married to it. Here's a good example or an illustration of what I'm talking about regarding corrective pruning. I borrowed this from Virginia Cooperative Extension. This is a typical above ground tree framework. What we're focusing on, again, is the natural shape of the tree itself. A cedar elm. If you don't know what a cedar elm is, I ask you to go ahead and look that up. You can type into your Google or a browser, cedar elm, C-E-D as in David, A-R, elm tree. You'll come up with Ulmus crassifolia. It has a different growth habit than a live oak. Live oaks tend to spread their canopy more like a large umbrella. A cedar elm grows more upright, has more of a vertical growth. Okay, so get to know what the habit of that tree or shrub is, and then look at the overall canopy itself and the overall health of the tree. Eliminate plants like suckers that you see at the base of the tree. Oaks are very notorious for suckering off of their roots in the landscape as well as close to the tree. Suckers, being at the grass level. So remove those. You're going to have to keep up with that. Remove any water sprouts. If you see multi-trunks on a single trunk specimen, you're going to have to make that call and say, okay, I'm going to remove that. Which one is the best leader for this single trunk tree? Just create a structure that's going to remain healthy and retain some of that wonderful architecture and growth that we anticipate from these trees. So let's talk a little bit about pruning. And right after this, these two slides, I'll ask Michael to see if there's any questions. Tools are your best friend, right? This is a pair of hand pruners that I've had for over 15 years. These tools will last you literally in your lifetime if you take care of them. I oil them up, I clean them off after every use. Well, okay, not after every use, I must admit that, but I do keep them clean and sharpened. And when I'm sharpening my tools like these bypass pruners are pruners that have a scissor-like action to it. The blades pass by each other. I think that they make a very, very clean cut. And I do recommend that you choose bypass pruners for detailed and finer work. So these guys, I keep them sharpened. I don't sharpen them to where I can drop a piece of paper and have the paper cut on them, right? Because I have cut myself with my own pruners before. So keep them sharp enough for your work, but not sharp like do y'all remember the Ginsu knife, right? That product that was sold because it was the sharpest knife in town for cutting for all your culinary work. Don't keep it that sharp, right? Just make sure that it's adequately sharp for the job. Here's some examples of some tools that you can add to your palette. Bypass hand pruners, remember bypass or scissor-like action. You can see images of what those are. Small bypass loppers, large bypass loppers. There are loppers that are sold in different sizes to accommodate different width of or different radius of limbs, right? So you want to make sure that you get the proper tools for the size related to the size of the work that you're working with. Right? Always keep that in mind. There are long reach pruners. Some are motorized. So the ones that are not, the analog tree pruner, telescoping rod with a blade, curved blade on the end for detailed work, for upper canopy work, and getting rid of some of those dead stems. I use that. I have seen motorized versions of that, right? There's a tiny little chainsaw on the end of that. I'm a little leery of that for my own use. I know my own capabilities, so I'm not comfortable with those tools, but with that kind of a mechanized tool, but you may be, so that's up to you. For close-up work, if you're thinking of pruning, gosh, what is that, 2 inches in diameter or above, and a lopper is not going to do the work for you, you may have to consider a hand pruning saw. This is a fixed blade on the one that you see. It's got a curved blade. They're wonderful to work with. I have one that has a collapsible blade so that I can put it in my back pocket carefully, of course, or carry it around with me. I also recommend that you do have scabbards with the tools that you have, so you won't be poking holes in your pants or damaging any of the clothes that you do have. So this is just an example of some of the price points that you will see, and it all depends on the brand. I'm brand loyal. I'm not going to tell you which brand I've got because you'll say, oh, Stephen B recommends this brand. Just letting you know that look at the quality of the tools themselves. Take some time and get to know the different tools and the different brands to see which one is most appropriate for you. So Michael, are there any questions so far?
Yeah, yes, there are. Somebody would like to know how do you keep them sharp, as far as how would you be sharpening your tools?
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you, viewer, for that question. This slide, I'm referring back to this slide. There's a little whetstone. I bought this, okay, there's a brand name on it. Oh, well, anyway. I bought this little whetstone that I use for my hand pruners. There are also these files that I got from the company that sells the pruners that I have. And I would take the, gosh, I don't know if I have access to a pointer on this. Let me see if I can do this really quick. Pointer options, laser pointer, there we go. So this part of the blade here, I know there might be two images of pointers, right? But the one on the right-hand side that's over the blade, this is the curved top. The top of this blade has a beveled edge. And I would take this hand file down here and I would sharpen it, sharpen it in a motion away from my body and down the length of that blade, that beveled edge, to keep it sharp. For bypass pruners, so again, I use a combination of whetstone as well as files to make sure that I keep that bevel edge clean and crisp and clear for my work. You can apply that to tools like these small bypass loppers as well. They have the same kind of blade on them. A little word of advice as well. If you're buying loppers or bypass pruners, hand pruners, make sure you get some that you can take apart. We have some hand pruners, fine detailed hand pruners that we purchased for our interns in training, but they're riveted together. We cannot take those blades apart. So the the kind of tools you're looking for are ones that you can actually take those individual pieces apart so you can do the fine work with them. Did that help to answer the question? I don't have a recommendation for chainsaws. I don't have a chainsaw at home. For any upper canopy work on the trees that I have, I'm hiring somebody to do that. That is bonded. But did that answer the question?
Yes. There was another one, and I think there was a little confusion between different types of roses, when to prune them. There was one that's, your ever blooming type rose that goes all the time, and then your one-time bloomer. As far as the difference, what's the difference in that?
Oh, certainly. The ever bloomings roses, they will repeat bloom throughout the year. Or have the capacity to repeat bloom several times throughout the year. The best time to prune those types of roses is midwinter, and you're also going to commit to another summer pruning with those kind of roses. Some roses, like the Banksia rose, Lady Banksia, I think that's the name of it, common name for it. It's a one-time bloomer in the early spring, and I would not prune that rose, that one-time bloomer, until after I see the blossom on it. If there are other varieties of single blooming or single season roses, I would wait until after they bloom to then start pruning them architecturally.
One of the other questions on here was, what type of lubricant would you use on your tools?
I use I use mineral oil. It works really, really well. I have heard of folks recommending like olive oil or canola oil. I'm asking you folks not to use household oils like that. Vegetable-based oils, while they can work, they have the capability of going rancid, right? So I thought that through. I was like, why would they be recommending that? So again, I'm recommending that you not use olive oil or canola oil or boutique oil like that you would use with your food, just so just to prevent that from happening. So I use mineral oil. You can use petroleum-based products. A mineral oil is a petroleum derivative as well. WD-40 is good for temporary work, maybe for loosening up those pruners if you've left them out in the weather, which I have before, and I've had to rehabilitate some pruners, one recently. I will use something like WD-40 just to or 3-in-1 oil, just to kind of loosen things up and get in there and start getting after it with steel wool to get the rust off. But mineral oil is best to use after that. So don't look at WD-40 the brand WD-40 as a permanent for your permanent resolution for your pruners.
You have time for one more?
Really quickly, yeah.
Yeah, this one would talk a little bit about pruning old roses or antique roses, basically.
Oh gosh, well, folks, I'm not prepared to talk about the hybrids versus the antique, or not the hybrids, but antique roses versus the other types of roses that were mentioned. I'll ask my colleagues to help to possibly facilitate that an answer for that. But thank you for the question. So, proper pruning techniques. I'm going to get off of this pointer. Stop the pointer. All right, proper pruning techniques. You got a tree. You say, I want to do this. I want to commit to pruning this tree. What do you look for? Viewers, I want y'all to look closely at this and kind of imagine where you would be pruning this branch, the branch that's coming off of the trunk on the right-hand side. Keep that in mind. All right, now let's go to an illustration. What we're looking for certain features. We're looking at the biology of the plant and certain features that we can see and identify to help guide us to pruning larger branches or even smaller branches off of a tree. We're looking for an accumulation of cellular growth that we call the branch bark ridge. right? There's actively growing cells that are butting up against other cells that are in that that are on that trunk, and they start to form a branch bark ridge. They actually will form a ridge that you can visibly see. We're also going to estimate where the branch collar is on that branch, right, coming from the main trunk itself. Again, this is actively growing tissue. We're going to estimate where that branch collar is in relation to the branch bark ridge, and we're going to cut or prune that branch or that stem at least at a almost 45-degree angle, at least a couple of inches away from that area that we've identified. So let me show you where that is. So keep this in mind now, and let me emphasize what I'm talking about here. Here's our tree again. This is an oak tree, I believe. Look for the bark ridge. You see that now? That accumulated cell that's cells that are butting up against each other and forming this little ridge. So now that we've identified where that stem is originating from, where that branch is originating from the bark ridge, now you're going to have to imagine an area that is the branch collar. This is actively growing cells. This is important for us, folks. What that means is where that branch collar is, this is where we want to prune because the tree has the capacity to repair itself over time. It starts to form tissue that, I don't want to use the word scab, but it starts to compartmentalize tissue to prevent any further decay or any decay that might occur on that tree. So once you've figured out where the branch collar is, then you, at an angle, you make that cut. It's as simple as that. And you'll have access to this recording to have this information as well in the future. If you're not confident doing this on your own, what I recommend is that you work small. Maybe find a small tree, a trash tree, like a, well, I don't want to call it a trash tree. How about a highly prolific tree like hackberry? Maybe there's a hackberry that you can work on and practice on in your backyard or in a natural area that you have permission to go to and do this, right? So find a trash tree that you can work on, or a tree that you want to get rid of anyway, and just practice on that. There are certainly workshops that are implemented from your local area. Look for those workshops when we can get together in person. I lead free workshops on these kind of using these kind of methods as well. If you don't have access to that, you certainly can practice with your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, or by yourself. But practice on something that is not meaningful for you to make sure you're doing the right thing a little bit later on. If the work is too big, hire somebody to do it. Don't hurt yourself doing this. Here's something you need to consider when you've got a larger limb. If you're working with a larger limb, like a pecan tree that I had at my wife's grandmother's house, the limb was way too heavy and way too big. And so I provided this pruning technique. It's a 3-cut method. You undercut ahead of that branch collar. Identify where the branch collar is. Look down that branch, undercut it. Second cut, you cut ahead of the undercut. What you're doing is you're preventing when the heaviness of that branch, when it starts to, when you cut it and you start hearing that sound, that sickening sound that lets you know that that branch is going to start falling off. It will prevent it from ripping the bark into that living tissue, so that you can make a final or clean cut to finish the process. This information is available from the Texas A&M Forest Service. As far as pruning techniques for up close fine work, I don't think I have enough time to show you on camera, so I'll go ahead and just finish out this presentation. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. These are the wrong ways to do a cut. Looking at a stem, identifying where the growth is or node, right? So you've got a stem and you're trying to cut that stem at a certain part of that stem. Identify where the node is. That's where that little bubble is, where the little bud is. We call that a node. Identify where that is. Do not prune towards the node. The angle is right. Well, the angle is too steep, but the angle of it, the direction of the angle is facing into that bud, and that's the wrong thing. It just means the water's going to shed off of that and possibly collect on the bud, possibly cause, potentially cause damage to that bud as it's trying to grow. Second one, the pruning cut is way too close to that bud, and the bud may die. Third one, you've got too much of a stub on that, too high again. Here's the right way to do that. Just about a 1/4 inch above the bud, maybe a little bit further, and always at a 45-degree angle to make sure that you've got a clean, with the clean tools, with the sharp tools, the right angle, you're helping to shed any collecting water that gets onto that surface area. So you're minimizing the surface area and allowing anything to kind of slough off of that. Very, very simple. Now, form and function. Get to know your plants again. Get to know what they are. Evergreens, like the tree on the left-hand side. That's a Cedar of Lebanon tree that I saw at a planting up in Oklahoma, and I took a picture of that. Get to know what that form is. The Texas red oak on the right-hand side. Know that these plants have a certain way that they grow. Understand what their natural growth habit is, to know how to properly prune them to their shape. We're not going to put a formal shape on these guys, right? On this evergreen on the left or this oak on the right. We're going to prune it to their natural shape. Now, I'm going to throw a curveball at y'all, folks. Think about this. Where would you prune this tree? I love this. I took this picture at the Fort Worth Botanic Garden. I just love this form of this tree. It's a little challenging to figure this one out because of its natural shape. This is a blue Atlas cedar, and it's a hybrid, or not a hybrid, possibly a sport that's been found to have a weeping form on it. So this is how it looks when it's growing. Of course, it's been guided by proper pruning techniques on it. But again, think about the plant that you're working with and how it's growing, whether it's a hybrid that's that has these kind of wonderful, unique shapes to them, or whether they have a more natural shape that you can then prune to a shape that you desire. Here's another one. Took this picture recently out at a community garden in Pearland. Don't you just love that? It looks like a bad hair day. How would you prune this plant? And do you know what that is? It's difficult because it's deciduous. The leaves are all gone for the winter. I literally took this picture about a week ago. This is a wisteria. It's a vining plant. So for this tree, it needs some major rehabilitation, and this wisteria can certainly handle it. This wisteria has been on this trellis for many, many years, over 7 years, and it's been doing fabulously. So just thought I'd throw a little bit of fun at you to give you an idea of what the bad hair day looks like on a wisteria. How about this plant? Are you familiar with this shrub? It is a native, it is considered to be a native shrub. It produces very small tubular red flowers. It's not a salvia, it's not a sage. All right. This is a flame acanthus, and flame acanthus will grow in our landscapes up and down the Gulf Coast. I took a picture of this. This was in San Marcos or New Braunfels, outside of a convention center, and they thought that they would provide a form to this, a formal form to this shrub. And I thought, oh my God, that looks awful. For a plant like this, consider its natural shape. This is an image from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. The image it's kind of pixelated a little bit, but you get the idea. These shrubs that are blooming throughout the summer and are a great resource for some of our pollinators, we want them to maintain their natural shape. While you can prune a plant like flame acanthus into a more formal shape, you're going to expend more resources, more time trying to keep that thing in bounds than you would just letting it take its natural form, its graceful form. So I ask you to consider that for plants like this. Here's another one that's really does really well in either case. I have seen firebush. This is Hamelia patens that has been pruned to can be pruned to a formal shape, a box or a rounded shape, but it does so much better in a natural form like this. And here are some other plants. Another plant that will do well. I don't have a picture of it, but it's American beautyberry. Prune native plants like the American beautyberry to its natural graceful form. Here's up close of the firebush. Y'all can see how they've maintained this. I took these pictures out at the Botanic Garden in Orange. It's Shangri-La Botanical Gardens in Orange, Texas. This was a couple of months back. You know, you can see how they've kind of pruned this towards the center of the image itself, but still maintained its natural form. And the plant has responded. When they cut that branch that was probably arching up a good foot above the canopy, they've reduced, you know, they've initiated new growth on it, which has responded. It's kind of broomed out a little bit. So anticipate that for the shrubs that you will be pruning. Other plants that do well with a formal shape: dwarf yaupon, Ilex vomitoria nana. Boxwood, non-native species, but it does okay in our high humid areas. Firebush does wonderfully, performs wonderfully, and you can certainly provide a formal shape to that. Texas sage, as long as you've got, you know, good draining soil. And guess what? You can also do this with another native called Barbados Cherry. In the neighborhood that I live in the Clear Lake area, here a little bit east of Houston, I saw a magnificent specimen of Barbados Cherry that was pruned, that had grown up to be about my chest high, so about 4 foot tall, and it was pruned. Now, what I'm going to ask you to pay attention to when you're making these formal shapes, here's what you do and here's what you don't do, right? So if you're going to make an upside down Jello mold shape, right, to these shrubs, make sure that the base, the overall form of the canopy is wider than the upper part of the canopy. The reason for this, you're causing shade on that environment at the below, at the soil level. If you focus on diminishing it or reducing the canopy towards the bottom of that plant, you're actually shading it out, which can cause shaded or weak growth and can compromise the health of that plant. You'll see more open spaces in those shrubs if you prune them incorrectly. Let's look at this picture again. Can you see where the holes are in this? And that's directly related to what I'm talking about. So just something to keep in mind. And when you're out there with your loppers and you're going to town and you get that lopper fever, right? Step back. A general rule of thumb for pruning trees or shrubs is no more than a third in that season, no more than a third of the canopy. Because again, we want to maintain that canopy. The canopy itself is performing a function for the tree. It's a photosynthetic process. You got to go back to college, high school, or maybe even grade school botany or biology to remember that. So folks, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. These are some resources that are available to you that can point you in the right direction and provide a little bit more information, more detailed information of proper pruning techniques. Of course, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension's Earthkind Landscaping Program. They have a wonderful one-page, it's long, but it's worth the patience of viewing it. Great detailed information on proper pruning techniques. Texas A&M Forest Service, part of our Texas A&M Systems family, has a wonderful one-page with illustrations of pruning your tree. I found this from William. I was performing a search online, and I found this wonderful resource. It's an older extension publication from 2011, so it has like 3 logos ago, but it has wonderful information in it, and I do recommend that you check it out. This is produced from Montgomery County, as a matter of fact. Houston Area Urban Forestry Council, if you're in the area, Houston Area Urban Forestry Council is an organization of professionals in the area, for-profit companies as well as not-for-profit. Myself, horticulturist Paul Winsky is on there. I'm not on their board, but I'm a member of HAUFC. I think Paul Winsky and Boone Holiday, who's another horticulturist in Fort Bend County, they are on the board of this wonderful organization. And we're trying to advocate, reforesting the urban environment. If you're looking for a professional, go to the International Society for Arboriculture. When you're choosing a company to come in and provide that work for you, you want to know that they know what they're doing, that they are, working for them independently or for a company that's bonded, that also has some authority to them through certification through the International Society for Arboriculture. There is a Texas chapter. Go to their website. They do have a search engine where you can look up some of those professionals to see who might be closest to your area that will come out and provide an evaluation and maybe even some work, depending on what you need. And of course, our colleagues across the states of the United States, the University of Florida Extension, they have a great web page and resources for you as well. Michael, that's all I have for today. Are there any additional questions?
Thank you, sir. There was one on, and I was just typing it up. There was somebody asking about, damaged material that's on plumbagos or even lantana. Do you leave it on there? I think that's, for most of the perennials around that are, semi-evergreen in a sense. What do you do with those?
Oh, so.
Yeah, the old adage, leaving the material there so it serves as an insulator, before you actually trim it.
Certainly, yeah. Waiting till the weather kind of calms down or stabilizes a little bit. That is actually a sound practice. So throughout the year, if you've got something that's dying or dead on the tree, I would remove it, or diseased. This time of year, you might want to hold back a little bit. I believe. Well, I don't want to speak for Michael, but I think you just mentioned that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where we're horticulturalists, we're not weathermen, so we always anticipate that there might be a potential freeze. So sometimes it's just better to leave the material there so it acts as an insulator. And also, if you were to cut that material now and then we'd have a freeze, you would end up having to cut it back even further and potentially lose the plant because it froze back even further. So leaving the material there for the meantime is the best way to go. Sorry.
Well, that's quite all right. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I agree with that completely. Any other questions?
How to prune azaleas.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Where are you at? The person who asked the question.
Peggy, yeah. Where are you from, Peggy? Beaumont area.
All right. I'd say get in touch with your county agent, David Oates, and he'll be able to provide some assistance on that. Maybe talk you through it. Yeah, I don't know what a schedule like, but we have the capacity of Teams consultation. If it's warranted. We can't come out to site visits. County by county. It depends on the county's policies. Currently, we're asked not to. In my county, we're asked not to. To hold back on site visits to get information remotely. But certainly, we can work around that and help you out. As far as pruning the azaleas themselves, well, they're you don't want to prune them right now. I wait till they till you figure out when they're going to bloom, and then I would prune without a visual, it's difficult for me to talk about. I would say, if you've got some growth that you wanted to head back, I'd cut back into the canopy to a strong leading branch. I'm going to stop sharing this this presentation because, well, I'll answer that question in a moment. To let y'all know that the next programs that we have, of course, February 17th, Best Practices for Citrus Plants with David Oates from Jefferson County. Then we're continuing on in March 3rd with Veggie Gardening with Skip Richter of Brazos County, and then March 17th, composting with yours truly. Composting done right. That's what I like to say. Let me stop sharing this document with you really quick. because I talk with my hands. So I've got a branch, right? This is not an azalea, but you've got a full canopy of an azalea. You've got some growth that you wanted to trim back. I would take, a branch and take it back to a strong leading stem, some sort of strong growth, right? So where it attaches to another stem, kind of take that back, prune, look at the overall shape of the plant itself, look at some of that area that you want to start heading back, and then take that stem back to a strong point of growth, right? If I start to cut that branch, so this is actually a crepe myrtle that I have in my hands, but the stem that I have my fingers on right here, if I'm cutting this midway of that, above a node, proper, I accidentally got a proper pruning cut on that, by the way. Wasn't paying attention, but I got it. There's a node that I identified. I should be cutting this this way, so I'll do that, right? So it'll shed. So I've cut this midway of this branch. It's going to encourage growth that might cause a brooming effect, right? You might get 2 or maybe 3 branches coming around this one cut that will be kind of weakened. It may fill in that spot, but it also may be a weak growth as well. So I would recommend to find an area where the stem is coming back to a more strong point of growth, and then cut that off using proper methods. There you go. Stuck my tongue out and everything. So that's what I got. But I'd say get in touch with David Oates as well. Peggy, he'll be able to provide some more information for you and resources to you as well. These are my magic 15-year-old pruning shears. I just love them to death.
Those are the bomb. I've got a pair too. They hold up real well.
All right, folks. Well, if there's no other questions, please keep in contact with your local extension professional. We're here to help you in best practices of horticulture. We're just you already have these tools for you. We're just helping you relearn them or helping you to grow in this with your landscape as well. Thank you all for joining us. Michael, thank you very much for your expertise in facilitating this, and thank you to our colleagues, Skip Richter, Boone Holiday, Ginger is on the Ginger Easton Smith, and down around Corpus. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you on, when is that, February 17th?
Good question. Yes.
February 17th with David Oates, and he'll be talking about citriculture.
All right.
Y'all have a good day, and we'll see you later.
Good job, Stephen. Thanks.